This is a longer piece. I'll craft a richly expanded version with new character names, deeper characterization, and more emotional texture throughout. The Duke's gamble. The words left her mouth before wisdom could catch them. I will marry the first man who enters this garden. Lady Cecily Ashworth said it because she was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could remedy, but the deep, marrow-level exhaustion that comes from years of performing a version of yourself that has never once been yours. 5 seasons she had endured. 5 years of silk gowns and pinched smiles and dance cards, filled with the names of men who looked through her rather than at her. 5 years of her mother's thinning patience, her father's mounting frustration, and the slow, grinding humiliation of being the daughter no one chose. She said it standing near the refreshment table at Lady Pemberton's annual garden party, a glass of lemonade sweating in her gloved hand, surrounded by women she had known since girlhood, and who had all, without exception, married before her. She said it with a laugh in her voice, light and careless, the kind of laugh designed to make something devastating sound like a joke. The women around her responded accordingly. Someone clapped, someone giggled. Helena Fairfax, her closest friend since finishing school, nearly choked on a strawberry. Cecily, you are absolutely wicked, Helena said, wiping her mouth with a lace handkerchief. I am absolutely serious, Cecily replied, still smiling, still performing. No one believed her. Not really. It was the kind of reckless declaration young women made when they had consumed too much sun and too little hope, and it would have evaporated into the afternoon air like perfume had the universe not chosen that precise moment to call her bluff. The iron gates at the far end of the garden opened. The laughter did not stop all at once. It faded gradually, voice by voice, as heads turned toward the entrance and recognition rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. A man stepped through the gate, tall and angular, dressed in dark clothing so severe it seemed to absorb the afternoon light rather than reflect it. He moved with the unhurried precision of someone accustomed to rooms falling silent at his arrival. He did not smile. He did not scan the crowd with the polite curiosity of a guest assessing his surroundings. He walked forward with his gray eyes fixed on a single point. Her. Cecily felt the world contract. The garden, the guests, the warm May air, all of it shrank to a narrow corridor of space between herself and the man approaching her. The Duke of Ashenmore had arrived. Everyone knew him. Or rather, everyone knew of him. Lord Damien Hale, the 6th Duke of Ashenmore, was the kind of man who existed more as rumor than as person. He was spoken of in drawing rooms and whispered about at dinner parties with the particular mixture of fascination and dread that society reserves for those it cannot classify. He was wealthy beyond comfortable discussion. He was powerful in the quiet, structural way that did not require displays. He was 34 years old and had never married, which alone would have made him the subject of relentless speculation, but combined with his reputation for coldness, it made him something closer to myth. The stories varied depending on who told them. Some said he had been engaged once, years ago, to a woman who had died under circumstances no one could confirm. Others said he had simply never found anyone worth the inconvenience of affection. The more dramatic accounts painted him as cruel, a man who collected debts and grudges with equal enthusiasm. The more generous versions described him as merely indifferent, a man who had examined the full catalogue of human emotion and found none of it worth purchasing. What no one disputed was that he had never been seen to laugh. And now he was crossing Lady Pemberton's lawn with slow, deliberate strides, heading directly toward a woman who had just publicly announced she would marry the first man to walk through the gate. Helena leaned close to Cecily's ear, her voice barely a breath. "Dear God, Cecily, what have you done?" "I was joking," Cecily whispered back, though her lips had gone numb. "I was absolutely, categorically joking." The Duke stopped 4 feet from her. Up close, his presence was almost architectural. He was taller than she had expected, broad through the shoulders, but lean, with a face composed of sharp planes and angles that made him look as though he had been carved from something harder than flesh. His jaw was severe, his cheekbones cast shadows. His eyes were the grey of December skies, steady and penetrating and entirely devoid of warmth. He studied her with the impersonal attention of a man appraising a piece of land he was considering acquiring. "Lady Cecily Ashworth," he said. It was not a question. It was a confirmation, spoken in a voice so low and even that it seemed to bypass her ears entirely and settle directly into her sternum. "Yes," she managed. "Your Grace, I heard your declaration." Her stomach plummeted. The lemonade glass trembled in her hand. "And I accept," he said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Cecily had ever heard. It roared in her ears, drowning out the birdsong and the distant clink of teacups and the rustle of silk as 50 guests simultaneously held their breath. She became acutely aware of every eye in the garden turning toward her, of whispers forming behind fans and gloved hands, of her mother standing near the fountain with an expression that hovered between astonishment and cardiac arrest. "You accept," Cecily repeated, her voice arriving from somewhere far away. "Yes. Your Grace, that was a jest. I am not laughing." Helena made a small, strangled sound beside her. Somewhere behind them, a teacup shattered against a saucer. Cecily's mind raced through every available response. She could laugh it off. She could claim lightheadedness from the sun. She could faint, which at this moment did not feel entirely outside the realm of possibility. Instead, she heard herself say in a voice steadier than she felt, "Surely you understand that I was speaking out of frustration, not sincerity." "I understand perfectly," the Duke said. "You are unmarried. You are under considerable pressure. You spoke honestly without intending to. That does not diminish the honesty. That does not mean you can simply agree to marry me based on an offhand remark at a garden party." He tilted his head, a movement so slight it was almost imperceptible, and regarded her with something that might have been curiosity. "Why not?" "Because this is absurd," she thought. "Because I do not know you. Because you are terrifying. Because I am standing here in a borrowed dress with lemonade on my glove. And you are a duke. And none of this makes any kind of rational sense. Because marriage," she said carefully, "is not decided in gardens." "And yet," he replied, "many have been." He extended his arm. "Walk with me. We are attracting considerable attention, and I suspect you would prefer not to have this conversation performed for an audience." She hesitated. Every rational faculty she possessed screamed at her to refuse, to curtsy politely, to retreat to the safety of Helena's side, and spend the rest of the afternoon pretending this had never happened. But beneath the panic, beneath the mortification and the confusion, something else was stirring, something that felt dangerously like possibility. 5 seasons, 5 years, no offers, no future except the one her father had arranged for her. Marriage within 2 months to Mr. Edmund Graves, a textile merchant 20 years her senior, whose fortune was exceeded only by his capacity for cruelty. A man whose hands lingered on her wrist when he kissed it. A man whose smile never reached his eyes. A man her father had chosen not because he was suitable, but because he was willing. And at this point in Cecily's unmarried career, willing was the only qualification that mattered. She placed her gloved hand on the Duke's arm. The garden erupted into sound behind them. They walked in silence along a gravel path that wound through the far end of Lady Pemberton's grounds, past sculpted hedges and a small ornamental pond, until they reached a quiet corner where a stone wall stood half hidden beneath a cascade of pale climbing roses. The Duke stopped and turned to face her. The noise of the party had faded to a distant murmur, replaced by the hum of bees working through the blossoms above them. "You regret it already," he said. It was observation, not accusation. "I regret a great many things today, Your Grace. The list is growing by the minute." "That is acceptable. Regret and wisdom often share the same root." She studied him. In the dappled shade beneath the roses, his severity softened marginally. Not enough to call him handsome in any conventional sense, but enough to make him look human rather than hewn from granite. "Why me?" she asked. "You walked through that gate intending something. You did not simply stumble into a garden party and overhear a foolish woman's joke." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the same measured calm, but something beneath it had shifted, like a current changing direction beneath a still surface. "Because you do not want me," he said. Cecily blinked. "That is your reason?" "It is the most important one." She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "I assure you, Your Grace, there are many women in England who do not want you." "Most of them want my title," he replied. "My estate, my fortune. They would tolerate me to obtain those things and would spend the rest of their lives resenting the bargain. You want none of that. You want escape." The word landed precisely where he intended it. She felt it strike something raw and true inside her chest, and her instinct was to deny it, to maintain the fiction that she was a woman in control of her circumstances, rather than one drowning in them. But the Duke was watching her with those grey, unflinching eyes, and she understood, with a clarity that unsettled her, that pretense would be wasted on this man. "You were desperate," he continued, his tone neither pitying nor cruel but simply factual. "So am I." Her pulse quickened. "Desperate for what?" "A wife. That hardly narrows the field." "I need an heir," he said. "And I need a marriage built without illusions. No romance, no pretense of affection, no slow, inevitable disappointment when reality fails to match expectation." Cecily folded her arms. "You make it sound like a contract for the construction of a bridge." "The comparison is not inaccurate. Bridges are built on honest engineering, not sentiment. They endure because the foundations are sound, not because someone wished them pretty." "And what," she said, "do I gain from this arrangement?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Protection, independence. A title and a position that ensures no man may touch you, pressure you, or determine your future without your explicit consent. You will manage your own affairs. You will keep your own friendships. You will have authority over your household, your finances, and your time." Her breath caught despite herself. She thought of Edmund Graves, of his lingering hands, of the cold smile he wore like a mask, of the future that awaited her in 2 months if nothing changed. "And love," she said, more quietly than she intended. "You offer none of that." "I offer honesty," the Duke replied, "which is more than most marriages begin with, and more than the alternative currently arranged for you provides." The silence between them thickened. Cecily looked at the roses climbing the wall, at the bees moving methodically from bloom to bloom, at the way the afternoon light caught the edges of the Duke's profile and made his sharp features look almost gentle. "How soon would you expect an answer?" she asked. "Tomorrow. If I am to call on your father, I must do so before gossip hardens into scandal. By this evening, every drawing room in the county will have its own version of what happened here today. Most of them will be unflattering to you. You planned this. I responded to an opportunity. You cornered me. I gave you an option you did not previously have." They stared at each other. The air between them felt charged, pulled taut like a string about to sound a note. "If I agree," Cecily said slowly, "I will not be silent. I will not be decorative. I will not spend my days performing gratitude for a rescue I did not ask for." His lips twitched. It was the smallest movement, barely a shift, but it was the closest thing to expression she had seen on his face, and it transformed him, for a fraction of a second, into someone almost approachable. "I would be profoundly disappointed if you did," he said, "and if I refuse, then nothing changes, except that you will still be trapped." The truth of it sat between them like a physical object. She closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them. "Call on my father tomorrow," she said. The Duke inclined his head. "Wise?" She laughed softly, a real laugh this time, tinged with disbelief. "Or foolish?" "In my experience," he said, "those are often the same thing." He offered his arm. "Shall we return before society writes its own ending to this scene?" She took it. Her hand trembled despite the glove, and she knew he felt it, and she knew he chose not to mention it. As they walked back into the light and noise of the garden, Cecily understood, with terrible crystalline clarity, that her life had just divided itself into two halves, before this moment and everything that came after. She had no idea which half would save her and which would be her undoing. Cecily did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed while the house settled into silence around her, the old timber frame creaking as it cooled, the curtains shifting in a breeze that carried the scent of jasmine from the garden below. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the Duke's face, composed and impenetrable, as though the world and all its chaos existed at a remove he had carefully engineered. Her own thoughts, by contrast, were a stampede. They circled and collided and reversed direction without warning, presenting arguments for and against the decision she had made, and then dismantling each argument before it could take hold. By morning, the household was awake earlier than usual. She could hear it in the accelerated rhythm of footsteps in the corridors below, in the muted urgency of her mother's voice, giving instructions to servants, in the stiff silence radiating from her father's study like heat from a closed stove. Word had traveled with its customary speed. By breakfast, Cecily was certain that every family of consequence within 20 miles had received some version of the events at Lady Pemberton's garden party, each version more embroidered than the last. She sat at the breakfast table with her hands folded in her lap and her food untouched. Her mother, Lady Ashworth, sat across from her with the particular rigidity of a woman using posture as a substitute for composure. "Cecily," her mother said, in a voice calibrated to sound calm and failing noticeably, "you must tell us precisely what transpired yesterday." Her father lowered his newspaper. Lord Ashworth was a man who expressed displeasure not through volume, but through stillness, and he was currently very still indeed. "And you must speak plainly," he added. Cecily's throat constricted. There was no delicate version of the truth. "The Duke asked to walk with me," she said. "We spoke privately." "We all witnessed the walk," her father said. "What was spoken?" "He said he wishes to call on you today, to discuss a marriage proposal." The words landed on the table like something dropped from a great height. Her mother's hand flew to her collarbone. Her father's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went very cold. "To you," her mother said faintly. "Yes." "But why?" her father demanded. "You have never met this man before yesterday. You have no connection to his family, no prior acquaintance of any kind." "He does not need a prior acquaintance," Cecily said. "He heard me say something foolish and he acted on it." "What did you say?" her mother asked, and her voice carried the specific dread of a woman who already suspected the answer. Heat flooded Cecily's face. "I made a jest. I said I would marry the first man who walked into the garden." The silence that followed was devastating. Her father set down his newspaper with surgical precision and folded his hands on the table. "That," he said, "was reckless beyond description." "I know. A duke does not select a bride on the basis of an overheard joke at a garden party. The man must have a motive. Land, political alliance, something we are not seeing. He already possesses more land and influence than half the peerage combined," Cecily said quietly. "I do not think he is lacking in either." Her father stood and began pacing, his footsteps measured and hard against the floor. "Then perhaps he seeks control. A wife he can dominate, a woman with no position to bargain from." Cecily's stomach turned because a part of her feared he might be right. But another part, the part that had spent an hour in the Duke's presence and had been spoken to with more directness and more respect than she had received from any man in 5 years of social seasons, believed something else entirely. The Duke did not want control. He wanted absence, the absence of pretense of performance, of the exhausting theatre that constituted polite society. He wanted a wife who expected nothing from him because he had concluded, rightly or wrongly, that he had nothing to give. Whether that made things better or worse, she could not yet determine. Her mother reached across the table and touched her wrist. "Cecily, my dear, setting aside everything else, do you want this?" Cecily was quiet for a long moment. Her heart whispered no. Her mind whispered perhaps. The narrow corridor of her remaining options whispered escape. "I want freedom," she said softly, "and he is offering something closer to it than anything else I have been given." Her father stopped pacing. "Freedom," he repeated, and the word in his mouth sounded like an accusation. "You believe a duke will grant you freedom? You believe marriage to a man whose household staff reportedly fears him will bring you peace?" "No," Cecily said, "but it might bring safety." Her father went very still. "Safety from whom?" Cecily met his eyes. "You know from whom?" Her mother looked away. Her father's jaw tightened. The room filled with the specific, suffocating silence of a family confronting a truth it has been conspiring to ignore. Edmund Graves, the merchant her father had selected, the man with the lingering hands and the smile that never warmed, the man whose cruelty operated within the precise boundaries that society permitted and therefore could not be named for what it was. 3 deliberate knocks struck the front door. Her mother inhaled sharply. Her father straightened his waistcoat. Cecily felt her heartbeat relocate to her throat. "He is early," her father muttered. "That is not a promising sign." The Duke entered the breakfast room as though he had been born in it. His presence reorganized the space around him, drawing attention the way a deep note draws silence. He was dressed exactly as he had been the day before, dark, precise, impeccable, as though he possessed a single mode of presentation and saw no reason to vary it. He bowed to her mother, who curtsied with the automatic grace of decades of practice. He bowed to her father, who returned it stiffly. Then he turned to Cecily, and his bow to her carried something the others had not, a deliberateness, a slight additional depth, as though he were acknowledging not just her presence but her decision. "May we speak privately?" he said to her father. Lord Ashworth led them to the small sitting room at the rear of the house. Morning light poured through the tall windows, painting warm rectangles on the carpet. The Duke stood near a low table, hands clasped behind his back. Her father sat in his chair but did not invite the Duke to sit. The omission was intentional. Cecily stood near the door, her hands folded, her pulse rapid. "You wish to speak about my daughter," Lord Ashworth said. "I wish to marry her." It was said so plainly, so devoid of ceremony or qualification, that even the dust motes in the sunlight seemed to pause. "Your Grace," her father said, his voice controlled, "do you not consider this a precipitous decision?" "No. You barely know my daughter." "That is true, but I know her character." "From one brief conversation in a garden." "From her honesty," the Duke corrected. "Most people speak in order to impress. Your daughter speaks because she means what she says. That distinction is rarer than you might imagine, and more valuable to me than any dowry or connection." Cecily felt warmth climb her neck. Her father frowned, visibly recalculating. "Even so," Lord Ashworth pressed, "this arrangement appears to benefit you considerably more than it benefits her. What assurances can you provide?" The Duke turned toward Cecily. His grey eyes found hers, steady and unshaken, and when he spoke, he addressed his words to her rather than to her father. It was a small shift, but she felt its significance like a change in temperature. "I will not mistreat her," he said. "I will not confine her. She may manage her own affairs, maintain her own friendships, and direct her own household without interference. She will not be pressured to produce an heir before she is ready, and her opinions on all matters pertaining to her life will be sought and respected." Her father's eyebrows rose. These were not the terms of a man seeking control. These were the terms of a man seeking a colleague. "And what," Lord Ashworth said slowly, "do you expect from her in return?" "Loyalty," the Duke said. "Truth, nothing more." Lord Ashworth leaned forward in his chair. "Do you care for her, Your Grace?" The room contracted around the question. Cecily felt her heart stammer. The Duke paused before answering, and in that pause, she glimpsed something she had not seen before. Not hesitation exactly, but a careful choosing of words, as though accuracy mattered to him more than comfort. "Care is not the precise word," he said, "but I find her presence steady, and I have great need of steadiness." It was not a declaration, it was not romance. But it was, Cecily realized, the most honest thing she had ever heard a man say about a woman in her presence. "And if I refuse you," her father said. The Duke's voice cooled fractionally. "Then society will speculate freely about why a duke's proposal was rejected so abruptly. The rumors that form will not be kind, and they will attach themselves not to me but to your daughter." Lord Ashworth stiffened. "Is that a threat?" "No," the Duke said. "It is the world we occupy. I did not design it. I am merely describing its mechanics." Her father opened his mouth to object, but Cecily stepped forward from her position by the door. "Father," she said quietly, "may I speak?" Both men turned to her. She took a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. "Your Grace," she said, facing the Duke, "yesterday you said you needed a wife without illusions, a marriage free of pretense. I did. And you offer honesty in place of affection." "I do." Cecily lifted her chin. "Then I will offer the same. I do not know if I can trust you. I do not know whether your coldness is armor or nature, whether you are guarded or simply empty. I do not know if two people who begin with so little between them can build anything worth inhabiting. But I know what awaits me if I remain here. I know the shape of that future, and I cannot walk toward it." The Duke watched her with absolute stillness. "Then you accept," he said. Her father made a sound of protest. Cecily nodded. "Yes, I accept." She searched the Duke's face for triumph, for satisfaction, for any flicker of victory. She found instead something brief and unreadable, a softening so slight it might have been imagined there for half a heartbeat and then gone. The wedding took place 5 days later. The Duke had secured a special license with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making bureaucratic obstacles disappear, and the ceremony was held in the private chapel at Ashenmore, a small stone building set within a grove of ancient yew trees, whose branches filtered the morning light into shifting patterns on the floor. Only a handful of witnesses attended: Cecily's parents, 2 members of the household staff, and the Duke's cousin, Lord Barrington, a genial man with kind eyes who seemed to exist as evidence that warmth was not entirely absent from the family line. Cecily stood in her chamber while her maid laced the back of her gown, a simple ivory silk her mother had obtained in a rushed week of preparations. There had been no months of fittings, no parade of fabrics, no elaborate guest lists debated over breakfast. Everything had happened with the swift, frictionless momentum of a stone rolling downhill. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Not because of the dress or the careful arrangement of her dark hair, but because of something behind her eyes that had not been there a week ago. Fear, yes, a trembling, persistent fear, but also something else. Resolve, the quiet, hard-won resolve of a woman who has stopped waiting for the world to offer her a tolerable life and has chosen to construct one for herself, even if the materials are uncertain and the blueprints incomplete. Her mother appeared beside her, adjusting a ribbon that required no adjustment. "Do you want more time?" she whispered, though they both knew there was no more time to take. "If I wait," Cecily said, "I will lose my courage. You barely know him." "I know enough. He will not hurt me." Her mother's eyes glistened. "A cold man can wound a heart just as deeply as a cruel one, Cecily." Cecily gave a small, unsteady smile. "I think his heart is locked away, Mother, not lost, and I do not expect to find it." "But you deserve love." Cecily's throat tightened. "Love comes in many forms. Today I choose safety. Tomorrow, I will learn whatever comes next." A knock at the door. Her father entered, his face a complicated landscape of pride and fear and guilt and something that might have been hope, all of it tangled together beyond separation. He offered his arm. "It is time," he said. The Duke stood at the altar like a man awaiting a verdict rather than a bride. His dark, formal attire was faultless, his posture exact, his expression unreadable as carved stone. But when Cecily appeared in the chapel doorway, something shifted in his eyes, not softness, not affection, but a tension, a focusing, a sharpening, as though, until that moment, his gaze had been resting, and now it was fully, entirely awake. He stepped forward and extended his hand. She placed hers in it and felt, through the thin silk of her glove, the surprising warmth of his skin. The ceremony was brief. The vicar spoke the words with practiced calm. When vows were exchanged, the Duke spoke first, his voice low and steady, and carrying through the small chapel with the clarity of a bell. "I will give you honesty and respect," he said. "I will protect your freedom. I will not bind you in ways you do not choose. This I swear." Cecily felt something stir deep in her chest, something cautious and tentative, like a creature emerging after a long winter. When her turn came, she spoke without trembling. "I will stand beside you with truth and loyalty. I will not demand what you cannot give. This I swear." Rings were exchanged. The vicar pronounced them married, and Cecily felt the world shift beneath her, a subtle but permanent rearrangement, like the turning of a page that cannot be turned back. The Duke lifted her gloved hand and pressed a single light kiss to the back of it. It was not romantic. It was not ardent. But it was careful, measured, almost gentle, and in its restraint she sensed something that might, with time, become tenderness. The carriage ride to Ashenmore was quiet. They sat on opposite sides, separated by 2 feet of velvet cushion, and a silence that was not hostile but was not yet comfortable. Cecily watched the countryside scroll past the window, green hills and stone walls and scattered sheep, while the Duke sat across from her, his gaze resting on her with an intensity that she could feel without meeting. "Are you well?" he asked after several minutes. "I am overwhelmed," she said honestly. "That is expected. Your life has changed substantially in a very short period." "Yes, it has." More silence. More. Then, "I will be direct," the Duke said. "Our marriage will not require of you what society customarily expects from a wife. If you need time before we share quarters, you will have it, as much as you require." Heat rushed to her face. "Thank you." "Do not thank me. It is simply fair." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been circling her mind since the garden. "Have you ever been in love, Your Grace?" "No." The answer was immediate, offered without deliberation or discomfort, the way one might state a geographical fact. "I do not believe love is something I am constituted to offer." "Or something you have allowed yourself to feel," Cecily said quietly. He studied her. Something flickered behind those grey eyes, too quick to name. "And you?" he said. "Have you felt it?" "No," she admitted. "I have not." He nodded once. "Then we begin on equal ground. We begin with honesty." The carriage crested a hill, and Cecily saw Ashenmore for the first time. The estate rose from the landscape like something that had grown there rather than been built. A grand stone manor surrounded by dark forest and rolling parkland, beautiful and imposing and solitary. It looked, she thought, exactly like the man who owned it. Servants lined the entrance as the carriage drew up. The Duke stepped out first and offered his hand to help her descend. She took it, again surprised by the warmth of his grip, and stepped onto the gravel drive. Inside, the manor was vast and elegant and oddly dim, as though sunlight had been invited but had not fully committed to attending. Tall ceilings, polished floors, paintings of ancestors who shared the Duke's grey eyes, and his apparent aversion to smiling. "This is your home now," the Duke said, standing beside her in the entrance hall. "You may change whatever you wish." She looked at him. "Whatever I wish?" "Yes. Nothing in this house holds more value to me than your comfort." It was the kindest thing he had said to her. A woman with silver hair and a warm, capable face approached them. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying. "Welcome home, Lady Ashenmore. It is an honor." Lady Ashenmore. The name settled over Cecily like a new garment, unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. "This is Mrs. Bramwell," the Duke said. "She manages the household and has done so with great competence for 20 years. Anything you need she will arrange." Mrs. Bramwell's smile was genuine and reached her eyes. "We are very glad to have you here, my lady." Cecily smiled back. "Thank you. I suspect I will have a great many questions." The Duke watched the exchange with his customary stillness. Then, "I will show you to your chambers." She followed him up the grand staircase, her heart marking each step. He stopped before a pair of tall, carved oak doors. "These are your rooms," he said. "Mine are at the far end of the corridor. If you need anything, day or night, you may send word." Cecily looked at the doors, then at him. "And you, Your Grace? If you need anything." He paused. Something moved behind his expression, a faint surprise, as though the possibility of someone attending to his needs was a concept he had not recently entertained. "I will consider that," he said. He bowed slightly and withdrew down the corridor, his footsteps measured and even against the stone floor, leaving her alone at the threshold of a room that was now hers, in a house that was now hers, in a life that had, in the space of 5 days, become something entirely unrecognizable. Dinner that evening was held in a small private dining room, rather than the cavernous formal one Cecily had glimpsed during her tour of the manor. The Duke was already seated when she entered. He rose briefly, an automatic courtesy, and waited for her to take her chair. They ate in quiet comfort for a while. The food was excellent, better than she had expected, the cook apparently being one of the few elements of Ashenmore that operated on warmth rather than efficiency. And then the Duke surprised her. He asked her what she liked to read, what music she preferred, whether she had traveled, whether she had interests she had been unable to pursue. His questions were direct and unadorned, delivered without the polite padding of social conversation, but they were not unkind. They were the questions of a man conducting a genuine investigation into who she was, as opposed to the questions most men asked, which were investigations into whether she was suitable. When she mentioned that she painted, that she had studied watercolors seriously before her father deemed it an impractical diversion, the Duke set down his fork. "There is an unused gallery on the east wing," he said. "Good northern light. I will have it prepared for you." "Your Grace, you do not need to—" "I wish to," he said simply. Later, as dessert was served, Cecily noticed him watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, not coldness but attention. The focused, careful attention of a man who had spent a long time alone and was relearning the mechanics of proximity. "What is it?" she asked gently. He considered the question. "You are calmer than I anticipated." She thought about this. "I think calm is what remains when fear has exhausted itself. I have been afraid for so long that I seem to have run out." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a microscopic softening around the eyes that would have been invisible to anyone not watching closely. "And do you regret your decision?" he asked. She looked at her hands, then at him. "No," she said, "not yet. Do you regret yours?" "No." A quiet understanding settled between them, fragile and new, like the first ice forming at the edge of a pond. After dinner, he walked her to the door of her chambers. The corridor was lit by candles in wall sconces that cast long, shifting shadows. "Good night, Lady Ashenmore," he said. She looked up at him. His face was half in candlelight, half in shadow, and in that divided illumination he looked less like a statue and more like a man. "Good night, husband," she said. He inhaled, very slightly, a small, involuntary breath, as though the word had reached past every defense he had constructed and touched something unprotected beneath. Then he nodded, turned, and walked away down the long corridor, his shadow stretching behind him until the darkness swallowed it. Cecily entered her room and leaned against the closed door. She was married to a man she barely knew, a man who frightened her, a man who had offered her more respect in 5 days than she had received in 5 years, a man who could not love her, a man whose coldness might be armor or might be the whole of him, and she did not yet know which. She extinguished the candle beside her bed and sat in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that was learning her presence just as she was learning its. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt it, a faint, trembling warmth at the edges of her chest. Not love, not yet anything so certain, but hope. The cautious, fragile, hard-won hope of a woman who has stepped through a door she cannot reopen, and has decided, against all evidence and all reason, to believe that what lies on the other side might be worth the crossing. A beginning. Only a beginning. Fragile as frost, uncertain as dawn. But Cecily Ashworth, now Lady Ashenmore, had learned something important in the last 5 days. Something the Duke himself had inadvertently taught her. That beginnings do not need to be warm to be real. They only need to be honest. And this one was.